and because he's an environmentalist. He's a bus rider. He wants to save the planet. But he was chatting. We were talking about things in life, and we brought this little discussion up that reminded me of this moment here. So here's the railroad tracks down here, and when I had a kid, he was 11 years old, 12 years old. We'd sit there on our bikes, and we would look, and he had this jump set up, and it wasn't half the height of this table, and it would just kind of launch out about 4 feet. He'd sit there and look at that, and he's like, oh gosh. And I tried, and I biffed and went to ditch. And he's like, I don't know. So he finally launched and did this thing. Right, just that little, he did that. So this is him. This is now Sterling here. This is my boy. And I hope this doesn't ever happen to any of you. You have to go through this, but here you go. This is the kid. And he's going airborne. He does this kind of nonsense all the time. I showed you the one where he wipes out, right? That's the worst. He totally does that. Anyway, the question is, how do you get from this 3-foot little to where you're willing to sacrifice everything like that? It's crazy. So if you haven't seen this, if you haven't seen the other one, I probably could find it really quick. I'll show you really fast. Some of you already seen this other one. It's just what this kid does. How do you search for something on here? Do I just go up here and hit it right here? So what do I do this? I don't know if that's going to pull it up. Do you know how to do that?
Is it old? Is it new?
What if I just go to YouTube? This is taking away, I don't want to time.
No, this is great.
No,
this is great, Steve. We love watching.
No, you don't.
We do.
This is him a few years ago. And there he is launching. Look what he does. Oh, so that is the other end of this, right? Because that can happen too. I'll show you one more time. This is great. This was really, really exciting. I think I missed it. Here we go. This is one more time.
Ow.
So the doctor thought he should have been paralyzed from that. And he still does. He doesn't do that one anymore, but this the other one where he's launched like E.T. over. But the whole point of this thought, though, is that you're going from just little tiny jumps. You don't do that all at once. Life is all about gradual stuff. So you pick now what that gradual thing's going to be. And in the long run, I think it puts you on the right trajectory. That same kid I just showed you, he was challenged by a seminary teacher to read 45 minutes a day, and he took it serious. So before his mission, he read the BOM 12 times all the way through because he took his seminary teacher serious and just worked at things gradually. And that's just kind of been the pattern of this kid's life, just does that kind of stuff. So I challenge you to make sure your trajectory is where you want it and keep working at it, and pretty soon you're doing things that you know you can do. We're going to talk a little bit about patterns and patches and how they vary in space and time. We talked about scale a little bit last time. I want you guys to tell for at least a little bit, for like 5 minutes, at least say something about what kind of patterns are meaningful to you when we think about landscape ecology. Landscape ecology. Consider patches and juxtaposition, the relationship of things to each other on the landscape. What are meaningful patches to you that you would ever want to quantify? Some of you think is telling a story, or could be your research specifically, or just things that you think in life or in our world of natural resources and ecology. What are meaningful patches to you?
So one that we're looking at is conifer aspen gradients of succession of forests.
So define a patch. What would that patch be? For one to the next.
So from one to the next, it goes from aspen dominant to conifer starting to come in and take over to conifer dominant.
So when you can quantify these different phases, right?
Yeah.
Sounds way, way good. That's a very meaningful patch. Just got some other meaningful patches to view. At least 5. I'll pace. I'll just wander here. Give you some time. It's like, sometimes the best thing to do is just sort of pace for a minute. Trevor.
So burned areas inside of a watershed versus unburned areas, and seeing how that could affect stream flows.
Stream flow and erosion rates, yeah. Patches that relate to fire, awesome. There's tiny slight.
What about just public land versus private land here? Kind of about
That's
hunting.
interesting, right? 'Cause that's an artificial patch.
Yeah, so I mean, you're trying to go hunting, you don't want to cross somebody's property, or you're trying to maybe mark out where you've seen animals and where you're finding.
That's actually a really interesting thought. It's not something you're really going to detect from a remote sensed image unless there's a fence you're picking up. Otherwise, it's a layer on top of it. But how that influences what goes on in that area could be huge. Really interesting thought. Private versus public. Right. We still need 4 und 5.
I'm trying to figure out what type of patches those choose to raise their fawn prior to weaning.
So what do you come up with so far?
That was important.
Is it?
Yeah.
It's a patch based on cover type or total percent foliar cover. Does it matter what the type is?
Yeah, it doesn't really matter what the fawn.
That's interesting. What seems to be the driver for you? You know the species in there, the plants that might be selling it?
I mean, they're super fond of like sagebrush stem shrubs.
Are they? It's all going in sagebrush?
What was that?
All your fawning you're seeing is all happening in sagebrush?
Not all of it, but in a lot, like also in that transition area between like sagebrush to aspen, we have a lot of like snowberry understory.
Interesting. Just one more. Unless you got more than one more.
Talus slopes, so like a big patch for a marmot.
It's a big patch for a marmot, huh? That is so true. What's the scientific name for marmots? All you have in knowledge, you gotta pull us off. Let's hear it. It's marmota, isn't it? Marmota something. Talus slopes. And species of concern, what's the other species of concern? They're talus slopes. Pike, pike are like, right now they are in the discussion. They are being talked about. It's an awesome one. And pretty detectable, right? You can figure that out from remote sensed imagery pretty quickly. You can figure that out. So landscapes generally reveal a complex pattern. And think about how these patterns are created and how they are maintained or sustained over time. With plants and soils and bare ground, and you can detect those, you can see them. They vary with that discussion we had last time on scale. And the questions you would ask would vary also based on the scale you're looking at it. You got some that are seasonal. Do we have any examples of a seasonal patch? I don't think we gave one.
Snow?
Snow is a great seasonal patch. I thought for my PhD I was going to do snow patches. I would go out to my study site, and here's this heterogeneous landscape, and I'd show up right when the snow's coming off, and what snow got left behind was real distinctive patches, and I thought it'd be really interesting to go back and look after the snow's gone a month from now and see if those patches reveal something that's different in the landscape. And you can see some without question. There were some aspen patches, they were tied right into that snow being accumulated. But you can think about other things that are being influenced by the seasonality of something like that, annually and through time. They can be permanent, they can be very temporary, imposed by humans at times. Any idea where that is? Here's some patterns patches you see on a landscape. Where's that occurring at?
Not New Mexico.
Where?
Not New Mexico.
It ain't New Mexico.
They have a Grant
But
County.
I like the thought,
They have a
right?
Grant County.
Oh, you think Grant County? How many Grant counties are there in the United States? That's a good question. Turns out there's one outside of New Mexico. It's kind of these rolling hills, a little bit of sand accumulation, got some patches of plants. This is all in Nebraska, Hyannis, Nebraska. There's that. Sour Orange Lake, lake operation. What do you think based on what you're saying? I mean, look at that. What do you see in this? A little agricultural, human-related stuff. Some real distinctive things that are showing up that are probably not man-made. This one, Sebring, Florida, down to close to the Everglades. Some of the effects of that house. How about that one? Ignore that. I should look a little closer at what I'm clipping. So that's New Effington, South Dakota. What are these? So you've got prairie pothole effect. What about that one? Then, you know, what is it that you're seeing? I mean, these patches, what are they made up of? Last one's real obvious. We had some water that were creating patches that made you trigger really quick to pothole type of response. And one before that, grasslands and wind would cause distribution of sand particles that accumulate. And that one,
Middle East.
Middle East? I should have done some Middle East. This is all United States. No, well, Nevada, close. That's Death Valley. So what you're seeing here is not really the vegetation. You're seeing all geologic deposits. And some plants, they did have a few date trees in there, and that's about it. Some, they have a lot of, you've been to Death Valley before? Who here's never been to Death Valley? Shoot. Why aren't we going there? We should go there. The place is amazing. It's totally interesting. It's so freaking hot, but it is an interesting place.
Did you know they do a marathon there?
I hope they don't do it in summer. They do in the summer. You do?
Yeah. White lines that ready to choose one.
Oh my gosh, that would be death.
I should not do that.
The marathon?
It's an ultra.
It's an ultra. What, 100 miles?
Yeah.
They do not. Don't run 100 miles down there. This doesn't make any sense to me at all. And right outside of there, Devil's Hole pupfish. That's a patch, right? You all, at this stage in the game, you all know Devil's Hole. I think I forced some kind of private bribe. You know what Devil's Hole pupfish is? Anybody that's not? Okay, there's nothing you do not know. Who wants to say what Devil's Hole pupfish is? Man, just really fast. You know what that is? You all need to know this. I'll be brief on this. I hate to be repetitive. I feel like I said this to different people, and I just don't know if anyone doesn't know. Devil's Hole pupfish. Oh, there they are. They're adorable. That's Devil's Hole pupfish right there. Look at them. And there's little tiny things. You'd never eat them. You'll never in your life eat them.
Where do they live?
It's a species of native Devil's Hole, Nevada. Oh, there was a picture of it. Ready? There it is. The Chilliwack Formation, located within the Ash Meadows National Wildlife Refuge in Nye County, Nevada. If you're going to southern Nevada, swing by and go look at this. And it looks, this is it. It's been fenced in, and so all you're seeing is this little tiny patch. It's a little patch. Has a population of fewer than 200 since 2005. Recent genetic analysis indicates the species may have first colonized the hole in the past 1,000 years, but possibly as long as 60,000 years ago. The pupfish has been protected as an endangered species since '67, and it has these conflicts over water use. Because if you're a farmer, you want to drain and farm your lands in Armagosa Valley, not far from there, then there's this concern that if you drop this water level below this little rock shelf, you submerge that rock shelf right there. And that's where all their breeding happens on this little rock shelf. So it's one species in one hole in the middle of Death Valley, well, next to Death Valley. And there are, at one point, they got down to like 30 fish. If we look at its history, it's saying here about 30 fish at some point. They were almost gone. So they're on the verge of extinction all the time. And
So-
it gets all this attention because you've got this endangered species that's protecting it, which affects the Ash Meadows region and Armagosa Valley, which is
Can you get those going in
Valley
like
nearby.
aquariums
Huh?
and stuff?
Can you what?
Can you get them going in aquariums? Because that's obviously
Yeah.
not much of a
And I
habitat
think
to
they
work it for them.
So I think they kind of mess with them a little bit here and there. And right next to them is this other meadow, where it's a little longer of a region. And they've got the also pupfish in the hole, the Ash Meadows pupfish in that little river, and they're about as endangered as the Devil's Hole pupfish. So they're all just up in arms over this. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, man, they are all over this thing. Crazy. It's a little patch, right? You think about the value of a patch. That thing has received so much attention and money. Nuts. Just spoiler on that one. Did you know it though before I pulled that out? So that's a bigger patch of water than the last one you saw, but again, geologically speaking, probably pretty interesting. In the Lake Mead, Nevada, and Arizona border. At least you can get the state of this. Nevada. No. It is Anchorage, Alaska.
Oh, I
So-
thought that was like South Alaska.
Yeah, you can be told, yeah, right. It's just hard. You have to try to figure out what you're looking at. Look at these characteristics and see that. Here's this old picture of this great big glacier that is formed and how here's the Knik Glacier, what it does. So they vary with scale. We look at this map, and here you get this picture of what's going on in these striations. This is in West Virginia. But if you look at it from a different angle, this is it's just 6 kilometers, but it's like focused in on the area. So we're looking somewhere in here is where I cut that out. So this, you're like, you don't make the connection to this at all. This is the result when you start coming closer to it. It's a deciduous forest, this real distinctive layout, but that's all geologic striations due to the movement of the plates. That's Salem, Oregon. Any thoughts about Salem, Oregon? What about the patches of Salem, Oregon? You
I
better
lived
say something
there.
about this. I know, so tell us something about it.
What, I don't know.
Oh, yeah, you do. Yes, you do.
There's grass
Where's your
seed,
house at?
Okay, this could be grass seed, right?
huge grass seed.
What are the most important patches that just ring out in Salem, Oregon? Grass seed patches too.
Oh, yeah.
Can you zoom in on it? Here's the river. You've got the Willamette, right? This is the Willamette flowing through it. It's all perennial ryegrass. They just grow so much of it. If you have hay fever problems, never move into these fields or you will just be miserable for a month or two, because I can tell you firsthand of that. So here it is even closer, but let me just really quickly show you this area, which I think is so fascinating. I gotta stop moving stuff down. Salem, Oregon map. So I pull this up and then we go to satellite view. There's Salem, right? And here's your scale. Here's all this land here that's got these patches of perennial grass. But really what it is, if you look out here beyond it, this is what Salem, the surrounding landscape, would have looked like historically currently does. What are these patches you see in here? It's just fascinating to me. It's so interesting. Look at this. And you can go anywhere, across the side over here, and you see this. It's just amazing. If we back out, there's areas that definitely, look at that concentration right in the gene. Down here. Isn't that interesting? It's all clear cuts. They're clear cutting their forest, and then you have these little patches that come back in over time. These stand out. It'd be an interesting little study looking at the patch characteristics and how that affects habitat for certain species. You know, have this whole thing about northern spotted owls. You could really do a little interesting study looking at this and what spotted owl habitat's going to look like in comparison. So those patches that are all based on harvesting trees, and you can tell by how long they've been there. You can look at these, the recovery of some. And some right here are just about back to what they were, and others are just recent. So you've got this time picture harvesting and what that does overall to this landscape. So you start to think about how often is a rotation of these patches in that land. And it's frequent. All that's in here, I would guarantee, not guarantee, but I would imagine most of this in here is public land. That right there is private land. It'd be interesting to do an overlay of private and public on this and see what you come up with in ArcGIS. That's got to be either the capital or Temple.
Temple's capital.
They're dynamic. You name that place? Dynamic. If you were to think about riparian system, this is all dendritic. It's all this movement of water.
Is that the Lytle Ranch?
That is Lytle Ranch. Yes. If that is, it's a Lytle Ranch. So what is that? You've been there. It's an orchard. You know what the orchard is? It's all pomegranate. It's the pomegranate orchard. And Umberto, I think he lives there. That's the new bunkhouse. Anyway, this little movement, the river, how it flows in here, I think it'd be really interesting to do a time change analysis, look at the patterns of water in Beaver Dam Wash. And you can even do like a vegetation survey, do a cross-sectional survey along this thing. But really just to see how much that water is moving. You can see where the channels have been over time. It's been all throughout this area, and it just shifts. I bet it doesn't take long. I bet it's within a couple of decades that right there is no longer going to be there. It's going to be over here somewhere. It just moves around like crazy. They can be permanent. So some patches are permanent. Housing, you can find a permanent. Seems like we make it that way. The shoreline itself can be relatively permanent. The water, the ocean's not going to go away. There's Mount Hood in Oregon. That right there is in Japan. It's a pretty permanent patch that's been created. They're imposed on by human activities. However we design it, however we think about the world around us, we often influence how things show up. They can be complex or simple. Is that complex? Here's Yellowstone Lake. There's Jackson Lake. So here's Teton National Forest. That's the road up here to the main part of the park. Complex or simple on this one? If you're in the caldera up in here, is that complex or simple? So what do you think of Ben?
I think it's pretty complex.
I think we get a lot of this when you think about all this topographic influence and movement of water and movement of soils. You go from the top of the hill where you've got your source areas and down below a sink, and how that affects distribution of plant species across the landscape based on soil depth, soil water availability. It's tremendous, a huge influence on that. If you're in the caldera, what is the species composition in the caldera around Yellowstone versus outside of it? I'm assuming, have you all been to Yellowstone? Mm-hmm. So when you go to Yellowstone, what are the species you see in Yellowstone for anything? Like, what do you see?
Buffalo.
You see some buffalo. Anything else you see besides buffalo? So there's one.
Bears.
You see some bears.
Elk.
Lodgepole pine.
Lodgepole pine. You ever thought about lodgepole pine? How much lodgepole pine is there? So it's a monoculture of lodgepole pine. And the tree density, and since the 1988 fires, it has to be at least 2 or 3 trees per meter square. I'm not kidding. In some places it's that dense after how many years? 30 years. And there's still 1-2 per meter square. I'm not talking per hectare. Per meter square. If you did the math, it would be ridiculous how many trees are growing there, and they're all lodgepole pine. They all look about the same. And it's because they're in this caldera. You get outside of that, it completely shifts, and you see a different distribution of species, and how that then affects your density of bears or elk or bison. It's an interesting thought to think about. Is that complex or simple? That's really kind of a silly question. You get right down to it. Most of our ecosystems are very complex. So we say that, yeah, maybe it looks simplified. Here's near Phoenix. And what do you think you're seeing in Phoenix? What would that be?
Not a lava flow off the side of the mountain that is churned with the salt.
It probably, I don't know for sure. I bet it could be influenced heavily by basalt deposits. But I think you're seeing more of a, and it's related to slow, but you're seeing where probably ephemeral stream channels that wash out. They get those little gully busters that come through, and they just bring sediments down and deposit. And the little dots, what are these little dots?
Creosote?
I bet a lot of creosote. It's creosote. There could be some bunch grasses and other things in there. Is that really something? Is that complex, or is that simple? So that is Bonneville Salt Flats, right here in our state of Utah. Landscape development influence of these things, geomorphic processes like glaciation, gravitation, aeolian movement. Aeolian, you know that concept of wind movement, how things get dispersed by wind, can be very influential in some environments. Colonization patterns of organisms and local disturbances. Local disturbances of different types can really create some very interesting and distinctive patterns. Here is the delta of the Ganges and the Brahmaputra rivers. So what you see, I mean, here they're coming down right here. It comes out, deposits out here in the ocean. Thank you to NASA, we have images like this. And you can see where we start to see these deposits that come out, go into the ocean and creates a sediment-rich environment that I'm sure influences a lot of things out there. There's the Mississippi Delta. Here's the Mississippi coming down and empties out into the ocean, and that's what's deposited right out there into what ocean? What is right there? It's got to be Gulf of Mexico. That's the Gulf of Mexico. And Ayers Rock. You've been to Ayers Rock? You ever been here before? So this is an interesting place. There's a trail that takes you down here. I forget the parking lot right here. You can walk up this thing and hike all the way here to the summit right there. And this is a great big giant accretion out in the middle of nowhere. It's just this big solidified rock that apparently is more below ground than above ground. It stands out like this behemoth object, but it's really distinctive and very interesting. For the people there, it has significance and religious value to them, for the Aboriginal people. So we have these things called landscape elements. We also call them sites and habitat. But these are the patches, the patterns we look at from the smallest land units that are homogeneous, that can be lumped into one group. That's what we're calling an element. So how many different patches or elements or of these things, landscape cells, are there in an area? There's some calculations for this. And so really soon here, we're going to start talking about how you quantify these patches and what are some metrics for doing that. We're going to introduce you to software. It depends. There's some good old software called FragStats, and that's what it does. It measures patch characteristics. And all I'm going to ask you, if you're going to quantify patches, what are some things you would want to quantify? Before I start telling you, what are some things? If you're looking at these elements, here are these tesserae. You have tesserae of different types. What are some things you'd want to know that in GIS and ArcPro or FragStats or maybe in Program R that you would want to quantify?
You probably want to be able to differentiate between a couple of different things, because you're not usually looking at a homogeneous landscape. You might be saying, I want to know the difference in the image between lodgepole pine and grassland and maybe one other type of vegetation.
Okay, so you're looking for differences in the types they are, right? You got these different habitat characteristics. So you're going to define and say, okay, that's what they are. We're going to give them a name, and you'll do that when you have your layers. That's what becomes meaningful. It's a vegetation layer. It'll be different veg types. If it's geologic, it'll be different soil characteristics, soils with rock formation, and bedrock materials. If it's landscapes, it could be aspect. Right? So what are you going to quantify of that? So then once you've got them into classes, you know what they are. And they can range from just a few to a whole bunch. If you use some vegetation layers that are available, you may have 5, 10, maybe hundreds of different classes that are available that you need to go through and decide if it's meaningful to your question or not. Are slight variations in vegetation structure going to really drive your fauna survival rates? Or is it more abrupt than that? Maybe it's just real generalized patches of grass to forest that really drives the success. Those are questions asked. So then back to this question, what are some things you might want to quantify and how are you going to do it? So you know, I should say what? You're going to quantify, in this case, a patch represents a habitat type. What variables, what information or quantitative values do you want to know about that would be meaningful to you?
Cell adjacencies, like,
Okay.
you might have a patch, like, kind of maybe how close they are to one another or not. That'd be something
How that's that juxtaposition idea. How are they near each other? Are they not near? Does that drive the influence you see on that? With sage grouse, there's no question you probably see something like that happen. So closeness, like the ratio of how close they are compared to other things. That's an awesome starting point. Anything else you can think of? The edges. And what would you want to quantify in an edge? That's a great thing. What?
I mean, you can quantify how much edge there is, or you can go to different buttons with edges. Kind of see
Yeah. Yeah. So you can, and you can get in the literature, right? Look in the literature, see what an edge would be like for a certain location and buffer it. It's an awesome idea. Then you can measure. So what would you measure? If you have an edge, a known edge, you got a width of it. What else could you measure from that besides just the width? Okay, length, maybe connectivity, like a network, how much networking is going on? Are we seeing going here within a particular area, or is it all linear? Totally good stuff to think about. Ben first.
Just patch size.
Patch size is going to be huge. In what way would patch size be a factor?
On patches on like island biogeography, like patch size and how close they are, rates of competition.
I like to think about island biogeography. That's exactly the thought. The larger the patch, you could influence how the species could occur there.
on the fractalization, like how that's is or not.
Awesome. Get into fractals. If you ever get a chance of taking a geostatistics class, you really like this world of this kind of stuff, you ought to think about a geostatistics class. And I took one at Oregon State, and at first I thought this stuff was fascinating. The second I thought, I don't know what the frick they're talking about. Because you start into statistics that are not that familiar to you. But way interesting. Understand a nugget, a sill, and the list goes on and on. There's all kinds of stuff that runs around. But worthwhile. And fractals is a big part of that. It shows complexity or simplicity. Anything else? Some other things I would think about is patch diversity. How many different types of patches are there in an area? There's patch richness, and I'll show you some of these values later. And figure out a way of calculating patch richness. Or about patch shape. I'll mention shape. Is it linear? We're talking about that, but does it matter if it's round or if you can have the exact same area, but it might be a completely different shape. And when you think about connectivity or fragmentation of landscapes, some of that shape can be really, really telling or important. In our field lands, these elements are forest, meadows, cultivated land, pastures, lakes, range sites, the list goes on and on and on. We can think of a whole bunch of different variables that can be defined as elements that are meaningful to you and your work, the research you do. Some are easy to define, some are not so easy. If you're plowing, if you have a defined field, and here it is, or if you've got a pivot circle, if you're working in a crop, a irrigated environment, it's real easy to see where the water goes and where it ends. Because usually the vegetation is going to shift drastically at those points. If you've got fences that are for management, those become real defined patches. Fires, lava flows, clear-cut forests, watersheds, grasslands. Watersheds being the top of a slope. You can just almost get a pencil and draw where the mountain is. Water's going to go one way or the other. It's pretty easy to delineate where that's going to be. Which ones are not so easy to, what other patches are going to be harder to quantify? at least to map out. Fire's easy, anything that's not easy. I think for me, it's going from mountain big sagebrush to Wyoming big sagebrush. I never know where to draw the line. Whenever mapping that stuff, it makes me nuts every time. As you get in the middle of it, you're like, you're gonna walk over here as if you're drunk. You don't know where to go because it's such this gradient. You see them over here, but not here. It gets real confusing. Those are easy. In Chico, California, these fields. Here's a fire boundary. Just obvious, especially when you get a near infrared image on it. You can see what's reflecting and not reflecting. What do you know what near infrared? When you look at this, what are you seeing in this that's causing this strong differentiation? Because that's an image from an aircraft that's got a camera on it that's sensing in certain bands. We'll talk about this later in class, but there's certain bands of wavelengths that's picking up, and use that to differentiate what's alive and not alive. So what are we seeing here? What are your eyes telling you what you're seeing?
Live.
You're seeing live, and how do you know it's live? You know, so you're going to see it in here. It's like, oh, it looks like that's obviously been live. That's dead. But why? Why are you seeing that so clearly and distinctive right there?
Well, the spectral curve, like basically it peaks in the near infrared, which is why when you change it to that, it's red. And the other stuff is dead and it's not ranging through.
Yep, plants, these trees right in here, these guys are reflecting. They are reflecting in the near infrared really strong. They're absorbing in the red as well, really strongly. Because they're using that for photosynthesis, they're reflecting near infrared. They don't use it. Over here, it's not reflecting that near infrared. It's the black soils, the dead materials absorbing that, so you're just not seeing that reflectance from that surface from sunlight hitting it and going back into the sensor. You don't pick that up. Because of that, you can still see what remained. If you draw a little patch on this, you might not see that. You can see them in here, but you're not going to be sure what's alive or dead. But right there, you can pick out who survived that fire pretty well. Other easy things: roads, streams, defense lanes, pipelines, stuff like that. And here's New York. Benjamin's a little hometown for you. Easy to define roads. Shorelines, cut and dried Venice. Very distinctive. Loch Ness, Old Nessie. Wells, here are the point features. So Wells Springs Mountain Peaks, the summit. Some are very difficult to define because they gradually change. Species are not organized into discrete groups, so as a result of that, you get this gradation that occurs, and it makes it very difficult to differentiate and separate these out. Soils are that way. Animal ranges may be that way too. If you're going to define the home range of a species, that you may think is pretty clear cut. So if you do that, you're going to go to the outer extent of where your elk herds are going to be. But does that tell you where they really are within that area all that well? It does not. So there's a big push right now, and I know that Rock and Randy's guys are doing a lot of this, and that is you've got a defined boundary, but inside that, they're probably hitting certain areas a lot. So we're running this thing, these guys do, it's a resource selection function where you're trying to pinpoint where these animals are at. Most of the time, so I'm doing for horses, we want to see if horses are just using this whole landscape. It turns out if there's water, bitches are hitting that a lot. So our collar data shows where these animals are just, where they loiter. And their home range could be huge, but the fact is they're only using 1/10 of that on a regular basis. So you can't really quantify that. It takes some time and tools and money to get to that kind of information. Dominance versus subdominance, relative abundance, biomass cover, these are all things that stability, turnover rate, there are gradients, can be really hard to pinpoint. So we classify patches into size, shape, origin, structure, heterogeneity, and boundaries so that we can make sense of it, we can communicate about it, because often the goal is to be able to communicate what you're seeing. Here are plant community associations or a plant community. The association itself and assemblage of plants occurring as a climax community or biological potential for the site. And that's often also tricky to come up with, to know exactly what belongs there and what should be there long term, especially in our Western society where we've got issues of what we think should be climax species often do not end up being that as different species take over, especially the invasives in the world. A plant community and assemblage of plants occurring together at any point in time, thus designating particular focus status. So here's some types. These are different types of patches. I'm going to run through them really fast. There's the idea of a patch turnover, the rate at which a patch appears and disappears on a landscape. Some are going to be long-term patches, some are short-term. They can be very transitory, right? They may not show all that long and be gone again. How that affects the landscape perspective will be depending on this: the size of the patch, the severity of the disturbance. If we talk about fires, how many trees were killed in a particular patch could really drive the ability for that site to recover over time, and it might slow the whole process down. There are what are called disturbance. These are all land. This is right in the book. This is a different book. It's not Turner's. This is Foreman's book, which you ought to read as well. Awesome thing. He goes through and it really gets into a lot of specific characteristics of the terminology and how we try to understand these patches and patterns and how they drive processes. Here's a disturbance patch, which could be, again, fire or logging or mining, natural or man-made. Pathogens and insect invasions are gray disturbance patch. And there's Oregon again, Eugene. There's patch cutting for silvicultural systems that generate these openings. We often have control over that. They're cut out. A remnant patch is what gets left behind. For when you have a widespread disturbance that surrounds a small area, so the things that are not being taken out. Now, that right there, any idea what that is? These are remnant patches. Yeah, so this is a Belknap crater. These are all lava flows, and when the lava was coming down, there's certain areas that did not get wiped out by the lava itself. They become remnant patches. Now it turns out, if you ever go to like Idaho, they've got the kapukas, like carried kapuka. And the kapukas are remnant patches, and it turns out they are awesome as reference points. So if you want to see what, historically, what vegetation might have been there way back in time, these have become real isolated. So you don't get a lot of weed invasions. It's just far enough from anything else. They become very isolated. They have their own successional patterns that you can track and monitor. It's really interesting to go to the kapukas for that purpose. Let's see. Here's island biogeography, which we just talked about. The theory of remnant and disturbance patch dynamics by MacArthur. They examine island size and distance from the mainland and their effects on colonization, extinction, species distribution, and patterns of diversity. And there's all kinds of papers that are written on that. That patch size really drives what you see in a lot of locations. Here's a regenerated patch after disturbance. You get stuff that recovers over time. There are restoration patches, another term of what you might be interested in finding or seeing. This is my master's degree. This is down at Bryce Canyon National Park, and they wanted to realign this road. So they took out 70 acres of this mixed conifer forest to put the road over here. So they dug it out over here and moved it, and it left behind this great big exposed patch. So after this was all done, they put the rock in here and they covered this all on topsoil. They said, okay, you need to go back and reclaim this, revegetate it back to what it was. And so then you start to wonder, well, how am I going to do that? Here's a revegetation patch. What is it going to look like in the long run? And the fact is, it depends on how you treat it, what you do to it, affects its long-term patterns, the long-term dynamics of the site. So in some places, like right here, I put in this study plot. But what I did is on this one right here, and I've got right here. This is that same site. So I just want to test this. You can't see it that well, but this was all hydro-seeded. We got a big truck and had a slurry in it of water and seed, and we sprayed that on top of these slopes generally. And that became, I told the guy to stop right here, and I put in my plot right there so I could look at that effect. And after we were done, we took all the bark chips we had ground up from these trees and we cut them out. We turned them into just mulch, and then we sprayed that mulch on top of this to try to protect the grasses. And then right over here, I planted, this is all planted with a mix. This right here was a mix of non-indigenous stuff that was still, it's native species, but they weren't grown in the park. Over here is stuff that was grown in the park. They actually collected it by hand, the seed, and brought it to Meeker, Colorado, and then got a combine and harvested that same stuff that was genetically adapted to rice. We brought it back and we seeded that in certain places. So that was a comparison of non-indigenous to indigenous. And then this right here, I didn't do anything to it. I just left it alone. And down here, I fertilized it. I put in nitrogen and phosphorus on top of my seeded stuff. Well, it turned out after, right now if you were to go down there, you could still see the effects of this. We could go, we could walk up and you'd see the same thing right now. And what that would be is this is all big giant manzanita. There are no forbs, there's no grasses in it at all in these patches. Right here next to it where I used commercial stuff, it just died back. It did really well for about 2 years and then just crashed. It did not persist. That right there is still dominated by grasses, but a mix of grasses and forbs. But to this day, this is 15 years, probably 20 years ago, it's still dominated by grasses. That right there where I fertilized is one species. It's still mountain brome, and there's a little bit of slender wheatgrass, and that is it. It's still dominated by grass. It was all based on how it was set up originally. So how things are restored, they call that initial forest decomposition, totally drives the long-term patterns you see on the landscape. And right in there, the seedlings of these trees are moving in. Down here where I fertilize it, to this day, they still have very, very few seedlings that come into these sites. And there's a little patch. These are all transplants. We tried to transplant it. That's a ponderosa pine. I used a bobcat to get it in there. That was an aspen tree. Transplant aspen is way tough. That is hard to do. Here's an environmental resource patch. An oasis in the desert, the seep or sub-irrigated patches, warm pockets created by topography. They all create these little localized areas of resource. They call it an environmental resource patch. And that's really kind of an environmental resource patch that's artificial. These crop circles, we do that all over. We used to irrigate by channels of water down furrows. We almost never do that anymore. Almost all of it is like this. And craters in the moon, the same place where the moons are at. Here's an introduced patch. Introduced patches are generated by the introduction of plants, animals, or people onto a landscape. Scotch broom, knapweed, and gorse are some wheat fields. We got cheatgrass that create patches that are enormous. They're based on introduced species. In our riparian systems throughout the Southwest, we've got a patch. Many of them do. Some don't have this as much because we've killed a lot of them off. But that's been a major issue of this introduced patch, right? It's all tamarisk. It's completely modified these systems. And that's enough of this. So next time we're going to talk about how you do quantify those, what the measurements are, the metrics for doing this, because in your projects that may be of great interest to you as you think about your research is knowing, being able to measure effectively these elements, not just classifying who they are, but where they're at, and how many of them that are in a landscape, and how that would potentially affect the outcome of that system. Okay. And I'm going to be gone on Thursday. Ryan's going to be here for none of it, for lab. So I will let you know if there's going to be class or not in the morning. But I'm taking off Wednesday. So I'm going to get a substitute if I can force who knows their stuff. So if it's not going to happen, if we don't have class, I'll let you know we do have lab in the afternoon. Fair enough? Okay. We'll see you guys later.